know what you're probably thinking right now. Oh great, another YouTuber who talks about film is going to do a Tarantino ranked video. Haven't already seen this 100 times. And I get it. But it's kind of a rite of passage at this point for film YouTubers, and I feel like it's a great litmus test to see someone's general views on film. Since I've gained a lot of new subscribers recently due to the success of my last video on cosmic horror, thank you all as always, I love you all so much, and in general I've gotten a lot of new people on here this year, I thought this would be a great way to introduce myself to you all and give a look at how I view films, how I review them, what I gravitate towards, and in general my perspectives on film. Especially since his filmography has so much variety to chew on. And I thought this could be light and fun compared to the usual stuff. But the interesting thing about Tarantino is all of his films are so different, yet so similar, that you rarely find a consensus ranking amongst his fans. I would say at the very least, 4 of his films have an argument to be his best film, and for me, 7 out of the 9 are near perfect to perfect films. But over this last week, I took some time to re-watch every single one of Quentin Tarantino's 9 films, and came up with a ranking of which are my personal favorites, but also incorporated some semi-objective critiques and context. He's the most talked about director at this point, and for me, like many people my age, he was my first introduction into auteur filmmaking. So I thought now at 24, with a lot more film experience under my belt, a lot more context in general, and I have gotten out of my annoying film bro brain, hopefully, I wanted to dissect the career of Quentin Tarantino with a new perspective and an even greater love for film. But anyway, make sure to like and subscribe, and yeah, this is my official ranking, as of now with a fresh rewatch, of Quentin Tarantino's 9 films. Oh, and always, Kill Bill counts as 1. For some reason, this has always been considered a hot take by people I've told this to, but Reservoir Dogs, in my opinion, is Tarantino's worst film. And for me, it's really not that close. I do get why people hold on to this film so dearly. There is a certain level of iconography that comes with it because it was his first film, but it being his debut also comes with a lack of experience, skill, and fleshed out stylistic choices that we've come to know and love. As a debut, it is insanely impressive. I'm not saying this movie's bad at all. But just because there's that level of surprise at how good it is and how it introduced us to so many key components of Tarantino's work, doesn't mean it holds up over 30 years later. However, its importance in his career cannot be understated. I mean, it not only put him on the map as it was a very huge success, but there's what it did for independent filmmaking, and it started to establish his kind of direction into the mainstream film industry and his filmography as a whole. Whether that be experimenting with timeline and storytelling, his focus on dialogue and its uniqueness, heavy violence, music choice, atmosphere, and his very detailed character building. But all of those components were done so much better as time went on. As one would assume. I mean, again, we're talking about his first movie. And I don't begrudge these things because I understand it was the debut film, but I'm just not the biggest fan of the dialogue. I mean, I appreciate it, but I don't find it that interesting. I'm not really in awe at the story itself or the storytelling order, and visually it's pretty lackluster in comparison to what he's capable of, but in general it's kind of dull. For me, it's probably a 7 out of 10, but if it weren't as important to the overall conversation we're having, I'd probably give it a 6 to a 6.5. This will probably be the one that gets the most pushback, and I completely understand it. People in general love this film. I feel like it was his first really big movie, nearly a blockbuster. To this day, it's his 3rd most expensive film, only slightly behind Hollywood, and you can tell. Visually, it is very striking. The cast is great, the sets are awesome, it takes a lot of creative risks, and the ending is a very great spectacle. But man, is this thing bloated. Honestly, I've never really had that high of a regard for Inglourious Basterds over the years. I mean, I've always liked it, but it was never really that high on my list. But after rewatching it this last week, I never realized how bloated this film really is. He's trying to tackle way too much for just one film. And he has talked about how he had so much written for this, so many ideas, to the point where he considered doing a miniseries. And I would have my apprehensions for that, but maybe it would have worked better for this story. When it comes to the two and a half stories that we do get and how they blend together, it just doesn't really work for me. They quite literally cancel each other out. I love Shoshana's story, and I think it is the highlight of the film, and while I was rewatching, that's all I wanted to see. The Bastards do add an interesting element and by themselves serve as a pretty solid story, but their purpose, while based on a true story, completely bulldozes over Shoshana's, who could have been the focus and sole revenge seeker. Now, we do have to point out the obvious. If he did that, it would have just been Kill Bill during World War II. And again, this was an issue for him during the making of this film, as he had written this story, or at least started it, before he ever started with the tale of Beatrix Kiddo. A lot of elements of her story were actually originally made for Shoshana, so to me that just makes this film kind of unnecessary when you have such a better interpretation of it, especially when we're stacking the movies side by side. But then you could just focus on the Bastards, however I'm not sure if they have enough for a full-length feature film and probably couldn't stand on themselves. But then we have the party scene. You know the one, Three Fingers. The one everyone overanalyzes and talks about how great it is. I do not care. I get it, it is very well done. But it adds nothing to the film for me, and I'm just tired of people talking about it every time this movie is brought up. Yes, I get the subtext, I get how there's underlying elements in this scene that add more to the story, but I don't need it. It is far too long to a movie that is already severely bloated. Sorry, but I felt like I really needed to explain this ranking, but yeah. There are some of his best shots in his whole career in this film, but by itself, number 8, Inglourious Bastards, it's probably a 7.5 out of 10. Also, if you want some tension, there are way better tense scenes than these two. Don't be alarmed by the ranking, I know how this looks. But this is the part of the video where you could swap everything around besides the first two, and I wouldn't be that mad. I love this movie, I truly do, but my ranking today comes solely from my rewatch experience. I've had this film all the way at 2, I've had this film at 7, I mean I have switched this one around the most by far. And to be honest, I'm not even as sure about it right now. But it is easily the most interesting one on the list when it comes to a ranking. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood feels like Tarantino's swan song. If you love his movies, love the universe he has created, his style and skill set, and just love old Hollywood in general, this is the film for you. This is the film for all people who fall into that category, including myself. But when you strip away that context and look at all the components individually, I started to see how these elements aren't as strong as they are in his other films. The ending is definitely the best part of this movie, the intensity, the violence, the spectacle of it, and just the sheer fun you have while watching. But it doesn't hold up against the violence and intensity to something like Kill Bill or the ending of Django. It is very satisfying, but not as satisfying as other villain takeovers in these other movies. Now I know there's another layer there with these events being based on real terrible tragedies very similar to Inglourious Bastards, which I even think does a better job at that satisfaction. But as a standalone story, I don't think that makes up for the rest of the film. Now in this case, I love the rest of the film, but not as much as I love the next 6. Then you have the dialogue and characters. They are just so much fun, very interesting, and peeled back in very great ways. But they just don't hold up to the rest in my opinion, although they are better than some of the main characters we will see in the rest of this list. But then you have the vibe and aesthetic, something this movie hangs its hat on. When you see what I have next, you will see that this is purely just a preference of aesthetic. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is fantastic. It is a vibe that you immerse yourself into from start to finish and you never really want to leave. It is a great definition of a hangout movie with some beautiful bonuses. But to that same token, it is very easy to be pulled away from it or even forget some of it. And these next 6 films just don't have that issue. 8.75 out of 10 would be some other director's best film by far. See, this is what I mean by preference. Death Proof and Once Upon a Time are neck and neck, and from a filmmaking standpoint, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is better in a lot of ways. But man, do I love the vibe and aesthetic of Death Proof more. If I could live in any one of Tarantino's films, it would be Death Proof. There's really not much else to explain why this is at 6 because it has all the makings of a Tarantino film. Revenge, genre film, great characters, and visually spectacular. But again, it's only at 6 because those things are just done better in some of his other films. Where Hollywood feels like his most personal from his life, his passion, and his love for film, Death Proof feels the most personal from a creative standpoint. It's complete freedom and you can feel that authenticity through the screen. Maybe I'm just a sucker for shooting on film, but visually this movie looks so cool and unique, and they actually physically beat the film strips to give it this rugged, torn up look that translates so well to the actual tone of the movie. It's gritty and just ultimate fun, and you don't get a lot of films like this unless of course you are into grindhouse exploitative films, which a lot of people aren't, and Tarantino gives us a way more palatable version of that with Death Proof, which happens to have better dialogue, technical aspects, and storytelling. It's a more polished glimpse into a world and a genre. Funny random story, but I've actually been to the Texas Chili Parlor where they filmed the inside of the first half of the movie. So while I was in Austin, Texas for a work. But anyway, like I said, from this point on, everything is greatness. Death Proof is also getting an 8.75 out of 10, but I'm tempted to give it a 9. To me, Jackie Brown is Tarantino's film class film. I feel like from all of his technical standpoints, this is when he really figured everything out and made a tight, concise, and perfectly crafted movie. And honestly, he hasn't done that since. You know, he's always taking creative swings, he's diving into different genres and styles, but with Jackie Brown, he proved to us that at a base level, he is a great technical director. The cinematography, the dialogue, the lived-in world and characters, the writing, the story, it's crafted at an extremely high level with no missteps along the way. I feel like you could study this film and learn about cinematography, tension especially. You could study narrative with this one, color grading, and then his use of music is just on a different level with Jackie Brown. It really feels like he made all of this money from his first two films and wanted to just spend it all on music rights and match scenes with them. But then on top of that, you have such a well-crafted story, where he makes the day in the life of a criminal, an ex-convict, a bondsman, and the most badass flight attendant combine into this perfect 2.5-hour journey. He also put together one of the best casts he has in his career. A perfect example of using a blank check budget to your advantage. I originally wanted to break this up into 3 tiers, level 3 being his 2 overrated but still good films with Reservoir Dogs and Inglourious Basterds. Then level 2 is where he proved himself as a student of film and a great technical director with Hollywood, Death Proof, and Jackie Brown, all of them being the best examples of this. But now we are about to enter tier 1 with his top 4, which is where I think he transcended great filmmaking and created timeless masterpieces. Now, the thing that makes Jackie Brown stay in tier 2 is with that lack of risk-taking and outside-of-the-box components, he plays it a bit too safe where it doesn't really stand out like the rest. I feel like Pulp Fiction was just so huge that he either tried to recreate the same magic, or for those who thought it relied too much on its uniqueness and risks rather than quality, he was like, here, this is a perfectly crafted version of the same thing. So I'd imagine that those who don't like Pulp Fiction as much would probably like Jackie Brown more, unless you just don't like him in general. But either way, this film needs to be studied not only in his career, but in film schools, and it is one of the most underrated and overlooked films of the last 30 years. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10, but now let's move into the top tier, the big 4 of Mr. Tarantino. Now this one is really tough. Like I had said, I went through my phase of thinking this was the greatest thing of all time. The first poster I had in my room in high school was the one of Uma Thurman with the black bob, which changed me as a man forever. I've lived with this film for 15 years now, and I quote it at least once a week. But I feel like it might be time to let go. Okay, but in all seriousness, I have struggled really hard with ranking this film. I mean, objectively, it is one of the most important films of the last 30 years, probably top 50 all time. And it is the quintessential Tarantino film. It has one of my favorite sequences of all time with the Jackrabbit Slim scene. It has some of my favorite lines in movie history, and is integral to the 24 years of my film experience. It was the first thing I saw that wasn't a blockbuster movie or something for children. And even at the age of 10 when I was introduced, I knew I was witnessing history. So there's not much I can say that hasn't been said already, but to keep with the theme of the video, I had to just break down each core element and compare it to the rest. It used to be the definition of iconography, but it is just not as iconic as Kill Bill, which I will get more into in a second. It has probably the best lines of any Tarantino movie, but I think the dialogue in Hateful Eight, just from a screenwriting perspective, is slightly better. The story is definitely not the strongest, but thematically I think it has the most thought-provoking things to chew on with Jules' arc, but it kind of starts and ends there with this film. The storytelling is definitely the most unique and influential, but that doesn't mean it's the best. I think Kill Bill might have that beat also. And then the characters are some of the best, probably the best ensemble, but the main characters just don't match up against Django, Beatrix, and Major Marquise Warren. Then things like cinematography, aesthetic, pacing, and needle drops, while great, are just not as good as the next three, some even being beat by films lower on the list. But if we were just going off importance and legacy, this would easily be number one. Easily. I will always love this film no matter what, but during my rewatch, I just wasn't as excited before, during, and after. It could be something as simple as the day I watch it, or the mood I'm in, or even who I watch it with, and this could shoot right back up to number one. You don't get the rest of his career without this film. All of the best seeds were planted. But similar to Reservoir Dogs, he just got better at making movies after this, so it's not hard to see why I believe he has 3 better movies. Either way, absolute classic, 10 out of 10, and no one could ever tell me otherwise. Alright, so this is the newest addition to the top tier of Tarantino because it honestly took me forever to watch it about 2 years ago. So it is very fresh to me, which could slightly sway my ranking. But since then, I have seen it at least 3 times, and I have been completely obsessed with The Hateful Eight. Most, if not all, of Tarantino's movies spend so much time immersing you into the world, which makes some people check out if you're getting nothing but dialogue and exposition for an hour, sometimes more, even though I believe this is where he has some of his best work. It's definitely one of, if not his best skills. And The Hateful Eight, on the surface, is a slow burn, but it is the best at immersion. It is written as if it was a play, and because of this, I think it has some of the best dialogue. Every character has such a unique presence and backstory, they all get equal time to shine, they have such memorable lines and moments, and it's all trapped inside this haberdashery. This movie doesn't work if they leave this room or we get to see their lives outside of this capsule, and it creates such an intense environment as you are forced to the edge of your seat every time you sit back to relax and immerse yourself more. Now, what takes this movie from good to great is obviously the intermission, where Tarantino himself narrates and tells us that someone has poisoned the coffee, with a few clues as to who it could be and who it's not. Then the rest of the movie turns into a Clue-style murder mystery, which is one of my favorite types of films, and I don't think it can get more fun than that. Now, yes, there is a world where we're introduced to this information earlier, or we spend more time with this part of the story, or the mystery is drawn out longer, and maybe this makes it a better film. I do believe that it leaves you wanting more, and in some instances that can make a film disappointing, but in others, like this one, I think it elevates the experience. But in order to do any of that, I think we'd either need more characters, more space, or less time with each of them to where we have more solving to do. But I don't think that would work with this film, it'd probably be to its detriment. You are the 9th person at this haberdashery, and you start to learn about and have your own conclusions of these 8 individuals, which makes the second half so much more potent. Now, I could go on for another 10 minutes about all the technical and artistic reasons that this is so great, but I just want to finish with Samuel L. Jackson, one of Tarantino's most frequent collaborators and one of the best actors of all time. His role as Major Marquise Warren is his best role he has done with him, and probably his best role of his career. In my opinion, of course. But it's equal parts intense, funny, layered, thought-provoking, impactful, and, most importantly, very entertaining. He is the best protagonist for this film. It's honestly hard to explain, it's just so immersive and one of the best examples of an interactive film experience. A movie that you can truly get lost in. This is an easy 10 out of 10 for me, and the more I talk about it now, yeah, it's for sure a top 3. It could be the best of his films if the next two weren't undeniably Tarantino's best work. When I started this rewatch journey, I saved this one for last because I thought I was so familiar with it. Like I didn't need to see it again to move it from around the 4 to 5 spot. But man, was I wrong. I think this movie does the best at almost all of Tarantino's skills. He loves a good revenge film, and this is the revenge film. This is his most iconic movie. The imagery, the sound effects, the music, you see these nods all over the film industry, and you still see some of these things today on TikTok. It's truly a timeless movie. This has some of my favorite shots he has ever done, and while not the most artsy cinematography, I think this is his best job at cinematography. By definition, it is the art of making motion pictures, and this is one of the best examples you could give. The fights are choreographed in some of the most fun, exciting ways. He incorporates mixed media, practical effects, black and white. It's just the most fun use of a film budget that I can think of. I would need another hour to go over all the things that I really love about this movie. Its detailed standout characters, the way the story is told, the pacing, the emotional beats, the perfect song choices, and of course the most badass female character in the history of film, Beatrix Kiddo, the bride, Uma Thurman in her best role of her career. But what solidifies Kill Bill at my number 2 spot is the island movie potential. You know, the whole if you're on an island and you can only have blank amount of movies forever. You get over 4 hours with both films combined and not a second is wasted. Out of all the films in the world, Kill Bill The Whole Bloody Affair gives you more than you could ever need. Obviously for me it's a 10 out of 10, but I think it might be a top 25 movie of all time. With everything I just said about Kill Bill, I'm sure it's kind of shocking that I could have any film ahead of it, but that's why this is number 1. Somehow, I love this movie more. Django Unchained is what sparked this video, honestly. I rewatched it for probably the 10th time a few weeks ago, the first time in a while, and it made all of my preconceived notions about Tarantino as a person, as a director, all my ideas of film, just everything, go away. And I looked over at my friend and I said, that's one of the greatest films ever made. Tarantino actually is one of the greatest living directors. I've already spoken about this film before in my top 20 movies video, which needs to be severely updated. It's been in my top 4 on Letterboxd and will probably stay there forever. It's one of the first movie theater experiences I can remember. I mean, there's just too much to say about this film and I have way too strong of an attachment to it. As you can tell by my top 2, I love revenge films. And Tarantino does it better than anyone. And even though I just said everything about Kill Bill, I think Django is the best revenge film. Where Beatrix has this bittersweet ending and kind of this up-in-the-air reconciliation with Bill, Django gets the revenge that we want to see. No holding back, no prideful walking away, all-out bloodshed, and the deserved ultimate revenge on the ultimate form of evil. Django is accurately portrayed as a superhero and is my favorite cinematic hero of all time. Even knowing everything that happens, I was standing up, cheering, and even getting emotional when he reunites with his wife. I was reacting to it like it was real or it was the first time I had ever watched it. I would need a whole separate video to talk about the greatness of this film and why it's one of my favorites of all time because honestly, I'm at a loss for words right now. I'm not trying to be dramatic, I just don't know how I could describe it. I know this isn't the explanation you would want, but I'm sorry, this video is already too long as it is, so I just need to get out of here. This is in my top 5 favorites of all time and just downright best movies of all time. 11 out of 10, easily the best Tarantino film of all time, and I don't think anything could change that. The most interesting part of looking back at Tarantino's career is just how every film influences every other film. Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Jackie Brown are so distinct, but they feel like they live in the same universe. Even happening on the same day at the same time. Even happening on the same day in the same place. He creates such detailed vignettes of the most unique and detailed characters, but the world they live in feels so similar and true to his craft. Then with his genre films like Kill Bill, Death Proof, and Jackie Brown, he finds a way to match the same energy but pull these Tarantino characters into these universes. All in all, creating a whole new interpretation. He does the same with his historical rewrites, his revenge films, and especially his magnum opus of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So it is so hard to try and rank them without taking into consideration how these films allowed the other ones to be made. As crazy as it sounds, you don't get The Hateful Eight without Reservoir Dogs. But it was so much fun to rewatch these, to live in these worlds again, even for just a day, and really dive into what makes these films so unique to one of the most interesting filmmakers of all time. Again, thank you all so much for the recent support, it truly means the world, and all I ask is that you give me your definitive ranking in the comments below, and please call me out on my list so we can debate about it, because I'm sure some of these probably pissed y'all off. But yeah, that's the career of Quentin Tarantino from my perspective, and I'll see y'all later.